Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm happy to introduce myself first. I am Max Bratt. I am the Director of Business Development and also work with companies directly along the East Coast.
Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Dio. I'm the VP of Product at Life Science Nation. I run our education program, and I'm very happy to have you join us for this session.
And I'm Greg Mannix, and I'm VP of International Business Development. I'm based in Europe, and I'm General Manager of Europe.
So thank you, everyone, for joining us for this session. We will be making this interactive at some point, so we'll have people from the audience. You'll have an opportunity to raise your hand, and we'll turn on your mic so you can have a little interaction and try to work with us, and we'll explain how that will go in a little bit of time. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A features. In this session, we're going to be talking about your branding and messaging. And that's really the key on how you share your story with the investors. And we've found that having a solid branding and messaging package put together can make a very large difference in the efficacy, the effectiveness, and efficiency of a fundraising campaign. And so Greg is gonna get us started. And so Greg, if you wanted to go ahead.
Thanks. Can you go to the next slide? Okay. So just a brief overview of what we do at LSN. We've been helping companies, startup companies in the life sciences, uh, connect with investors and identify the right investors for their particular technology, stage of development, geographic location, et cetera. We've been doing it for about 13 years now. And the way it all started was with a database of investors. And that database has grown and grown. And we have a full team of investor analysts at Life Science Nation who are continually updating and adding new investors and really, trying to understand the market so that we can offer that service to companies. And one of the ways we offer the database, which we think is really a key tool for a fundraising company, is a custom app on Salesforce, which is the largest um, platform for customer relationship management or CRM in the world. And we've developed a custom app that not only allows you access to our database of investors, but actually allows you to track your fundraising activities and really be organized. You can run your campaign on this. The other thing we do, which is probably the most visible thing that we do, is the conference that we call Redefining Every Stage of Investment. And it's a conference that is focused on funding. And it's a unique conference because we get a big turnout of investors who are looking for investment opportunities. And we do it 5 times a year. So we always go to JP Morgan in San Francisco at the beginning of the year in January, and we always go to Boston in September. And then in between, we have three other conferences that are usually between Europe, Boston, San Diego, hopefully Asia next year. We'll keep you posted on that. So that's what we do at LSN. You want to go to the next slide, Karen? So for your fundraising, there are many steps and many things that you need to keep in mind. And we call it a global roadshow because fundraising is not a local or regional endeavor. If you try to stay within a single region or small area, you will have a lot of difficulty finding the right investors. You need to speak to so many investors, and that's why we encourage companies to go global. And we give you the tools to do that at our conferences and using our database. So, for a global roadshow preparation, first of all, you need to develop your story. That's really important. Then create marketing collateral, which is what we're going to talk about today, where you can reflect that story in different formats and really be able to reach investors. Then you'll need a list of investors to go after. And we think that companies need need to reach out to about 800 investors to find three or four who that will invest in their platform. It's not enough to reach out to 30 or 50. You probably won't find the right investors. So having that large global target list is super important. We've actually spoken to many investors about how they go about managing their deal flow and finding the right opportunities to invest in. And they've confirmed that investors talk to 600 to 800 companies. They get a lot of um, requests for meetings, et cetera, and they look at 600 to 800 companies to identify maybe three or four that they will invest in. And so it's a numbers game, and we can help you get that target list. Use a CRM program software that helps you manage your campaign. Use somebody to help you set up meetings. Super important. A lot of CEOs think that they will be able to do it all themselves, and it's so time consuming and it really is tough to keep organized. And having someone help set up the meetings, it could be an admin, it can be someone who you get through an internship program, it could be an intern, it could be someone who's just interested in learning about business development and is willing to help you. And then you go on to execute the fundraising campaign, and that means canvassing, which is sending emails, LinkedIn messages, phone calls. It also means getting out of your region and going to conferences, going to meetings where you can hopefully identify new investors, keeping track of the metrics, following up, and then finally you'll have a short list of investors after all of that who will be the ones that hopefully you'll go into due diligence and close a deal with.
And so, Greg, can I just add on a little bit here? You had spoken a little bit about the importance of leaving your region. And we tell this to companies all the time, but it does not matter if you are in Boston or San Francisco or San Diego or any of the other huge biotech hubs of the world, or if you are in the middle of nowhere. There will never be enough investors in your region, and that's why it's important to leave the region. And that is completely visible in that 800 to 3 rule. And then in the execution of that, when Greg talks about the importance of using a CRM, we will again hear it all the time when we talk with companies. We ask them how they manage the investors that they're reaching out to. And Excel is the number one thing that we hear as feedback. And it's easy because A, it's free, and B, it typically comes automatically installed on your computer. But the issue with using Excel is that when a company tells me they're using Excel, that is typically an indicator that one, they're probably dropping the ball somewhere with outreaches that maybe they're not following up when they should be, and they're just not following up the way that they need to be. Or two, their list is not big enough. Because if you can effectively manage 600 to 800 people on Excel, and you tell me that, I probably don't believe you. No matter how good you are with Excel, it's important to have a CRM that can actually remind you not just the date of next follow-up, the materials that have been sent, notes from previous meetings, where you stand with them, and all of this information that just isn't possible without the use of a CRM. And our team, both internally and recommends it to companies, we use Salesforce. We find it to be a really powerful tool. It also syncs directly with our database, meaning that for companies who do get onboarded with the LSN investor database, we can literally sync our back end of investors to you. And that way, every day you'll wake up and you'll start seeing new investors that are plugged into it. But with any CRM, whether it's HubSpot, Monday.com, some of the other small, cheap ones too, most of those you're able to export lists and import lists, meaning that if you were to, and I just use the investor database that we offer as an example, but if you were to get onboarded with our investor database and find a list of either investor leads or strategic partner leads, you can typically almost always just import that to your own CRM and then start managing it that way. But any CRM you use is going to be 100 times better than just using Excel.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
no other CRM has an application that's specifically designed for a fundraising campaign. That's something that we designed in-house at LSN, and it's really really effective.
And
And
Karen built it, so she is the most qualified person to talk about the importance of how to use it.
well, so the that app came about since we have experience. We don't do this anymore, but we used to be a broker dealer, and so that was how we kept track of our outreach on behalf of our clients. And so we have real world practical experience in running a fundraising campaign and why it's effective and why we used it to manage our fundraisers, especially if there are multiple people involved in the fundraise. You want to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And so that's kind of why it's designed the way it is. And realistically, you're going to want more than one person involved in a fundraise. Trying to manage it on your own it's a Sisyphean battle. So you're going to want to get some help from someone else.
Yeah. So I know I kind of hijacked the conversation here, and I'll share a little bit more about the execution of canvassing a list, gathering a list, and how to act on it in just a minute. But Karen, I'll let you go to the next slide for Greg.
So typically the marketing, what we call marketing collateral, and other people might call it different things, but basically it's the tools that you'll be using to communicate your investment opportunity to investors, to strategic partners, etc. It'll have several elements, and it will start with a logo, a tagline, which we'll talk more about later, which is 6 to 8 words that kind of puts your business in context for anyone who reads it. An elevator pitch, which is several sentences and will expand on your tagline, and then all of that will be expressed across different documents. And we like to talk about an executive summary, a one pager, and an investment, a non-confidential investment deck. But what's interesting is that different investors will prefer to look at different types of documents. So we'll go into that in a few minutes. So some will prefer to look at a deck, some will prefer to look at a one pager, and some will look at an executive summary. And the best way to make sure that the investor is getting what they want when you reach out is to offer all three formats so that they can choose what they want to look at. So that's what we recommend. And the easiest way to do that these days is including a link in your communication, in your email.
Yeah, I mean, I always reach for the pitch deck. I know.
I like the one pager.
I do the pitch deck too, but it's funny if you go to a room of 300 investors, I bet 100 of them would say they prefer the pitch deck. The other 100 would say they prefer the slide deck, and then or the one pager, and then the last third would say they like the executive summary.
Yeah.
So it is about a third across the board.
And
Which is
the reason that we say to include all three is that inevitably an investor will look at only one of the three. So you need to make sure that your entire story is in each of the documents. And so that each one can provide all of the information, because inevitably the investor's going to pick just one.
And we know from experience from investors that we've spoken to in fundraising companies that investors, when they get your information, they likely will not spend more than 2 minutes looking at whatever you send them. So whether it's a deck or an executive summary, it has to be really well prepared, really concise, and that's what we're going to talk about today. You don't have the luxury of having an investor read through 30 pages of a slide deck. It's not going to happen. So you have to think of a way. How can you get your message across in a concise way? And that's the focus of today's talk.
And
So,
so one,
oh,
sorry,
go ahead.
one thing
No,
that I really quickly want to address too, we have a question, and it's a really good question, and I don't want to go on too much of a tangent to answer it. But Laura is asking, how much money should a company have to support fundraising? Travel, CRMs, salary costs, material preparation, all of the above. Um, and the non-answer to the question is it really depends. And I don't know how much time we're going to get to go into specifics of the pitch deck and what content we actually recommend. But one thing that we do recommend is called a Gantt chart. And it walks through exactly how much you're asking for and where the use of funds goes. And we always recommend including fundraising costs into your budget of your ask. Whether it is 25,000 to 50,000, any amount that you can justify by mapping your next 2 to 3 years, saying these are the events I need to attend, these are the travel costs that I could rough ballpark being associated with that, hotel, flights, here's the subscription to the database, all of that stuff, as long as you can map it out and justify a rough ballpark of what you're asking, work it directly into your fundraising ask. If you're going to seek, 5 million for a Series A, um, that 5 million should include budget to travel.
Yeah, and take into account that you're going to want like 18 to 24 months of runway when you start your fundraising campaign. So take into account how many events you're going to want to be attending over that time, how many of them you want to be attending in person versus which ones you're willing to attend virtually. And just take that into consideration. And fundraising is not cheap. Unfortunately, you need to spend money to make money.
Yeah, it's not cheap and it
Absolutely.
also is not quick. One of the two things that we probably hear companies underestimate when it comes to fundraising is A, the amount of time it takes. I can't tell you the amount of companies I talk to that say, "Oh, I'm just starting my round. I expect to close in 4 to 5 months." It takes 9 to 18 if you're lucky. And that's because investors want to meet you again, meet you a third time, see you hit a milestone, meet you again, and then invest. And so that is a process that takes time, especially as you continuously hit milestones. And then the number two thing, which we've talked about earlier, and we'll talk about it again in a minute, is just the amount of investors that you need to speak to. If you are relying on 40 to 50 contacts you have from previous professional experience, that number is going to dwindle very quickly.
Yeah, so the other thing to be mindful of, and this is kind of what this is going over, is that you don't just want to leave your region, which, as we've mentioned before, is critical not just in, you know, not enough in your region, but also in expanding your network and your reach to different regions of the world and different expertise. But you also want to keep an open mind in terms of which types of investors you reach out to. And the money that might be a good fit for you, you don't know exactly where it might end up coming from. It could, of course, be the traditional VC, or it could be an angel group. Of course, a lot of people will start off with family and friends, but also keep in mind that the large companies sometimes partner earlier than expected, depending on the technology. Corporate venture capital is also a great in with a strategic partner and a way to get expertise. A lot of foundations are now doing venture investing, and so they're not just about grants anymore, so they're another good source. And then other than that, of course, there are the venture capital, this traditional venture capital, but even they are different than they used to be, with micro VCs popping up, and some having missions and things like that. So just keep an open mind, take a look at what you can find out about their investment criteria, and just see if they could be a fit for you. But to get your foot in the door, you want to make sure that you have the correct branding and messaging. And a lot of what we talk about when we talk about branding and messaging is making it as easy as possible for the investor to say yes to a meeting. This is all about getting a yes to that first meeting, which means that you want your branding and messaging to be very clear and very concise, because as Greg mentioned, they're not going to spend a lot of time looking at your materials. And so you want to make sure that you get to the point clearly and that you give them all of the information that they need as clearly and concisely as possible. Now, when you're doing your outreach and when you're having conversations with investors, we frequently say that especially scientist entrepreneurs need to speak multiple languages. And, we don't mean languages as English, Spanish, and the like. What we mean is you need to be able to have a conversation either very scientific if you're talking to someone in technical and they're doing the scientific due diligence, or be able to express what it is you do in more everyday terms, because you can't assume that the person you're speaking to has a scientific background. Um, and so as you're going through your relationship with an investor, with the firm event, you're probably going to start with someone who might not necessarily have a science background. This is, what we refer to as the gatekeeper. This is where you want to be general. You want to give them enough information to get your foot in the door. They're the ones who will make the initial assessment of whether or not you're a fit for their firm. And then they'll bump it up to what we call the navigator. So this is where the conversation starts to get a little bit more technical. They're going to do a little bit more work into what it is you do and make sure that you're a good fit for their investment thesis. Once you get through that, you're eventually going to get to an evaluator. Now, this is where the deep due diligence happens. So this is where the conversation is going to get very technical, very scientific in nature as they go through their scientific due diligence and really make sure that they are on board with investing in your company. But once that's done, you're going to be getting to the decision maker. And this is also where they're going to make sure that everything is a fit. It's not just about the science, it's about the entire package. What is your regulatory reimbursement strategy? What is your path to exit? Are there any challenges on market entry that they are leery of? So that is everything that they're going to consider, because an investor is investing in a company, not just in a technology. So that's where they're going to make sure that everything is a fit, including everything outside of the technology.
And one thing too to add is a lot of times people kind of shoot themselves in the foot before they start, meaning that where a lot of companies fail to progress throughout this is the gatekeeper. And it's again an inability to effectively communicate to in that general language, who's often going to be the first person you're going to speak with. Again, they're not experts in the science, they're not experts in the business. What they're really looking for, and we kind of jokingly call it the movie trailer, but they're looking for a compelling, quick overview of who you are, what you do, why you're differentiated, why your management team has what it takes to be successful, all of this information, and you don't need to go so far in depth on any of it. You just want to be able to give them a compelling enough reason to pass you on.
Yep. And so I have a science background, so I understand the jargon, as it were. But one thing that we run into with a lot of the startups that we meet is, it'll be a meeting of our CEO, me, and the company, and they'll explain what they do, and then our CEO Dennis will look at me and be like, "What did they just say? What are they doing?" And I have to then quote unquote translate it for him. That's what you want to avoid. That's what you don't want them to have that scientific knowledge in order to understand what it is you are doing. And so that's what we're trying to help you avoid.
A lot of investors and a lot of people you'll meet at conferences don't have a science background. They
Yeah.
might have a background in finance or business or something else. So you have to be aware of who you're talking to. And if you don't know, keep it on a level where everyone can understand it.
Yeah. So, how do you start your branding and messaging? Well, you're probably going to want to start with some sort of logo. And it can be anything from something that's stylistic to something that kind of indicates what your company is doing. So, Linked Up Bioscience, they were an antibody company. Riley Pharmaceuticals, they were all about back pain. And so you can see here that a lot of these companies have um, logos that really reflect what it is that they're doing. One other thing that I want to note here is that you'll see the tagline of these companies is included in the logo. And this is one thing that we like to emphasize, because if you're going to a partnering event or something like JPM Week in San Francisco, people get hundreds of business cards, and you're not going to be able to remember everyone you met with and who they are based on their business card. But as a startup CEO, if you're talking to a lot of investors, having that tagline along with your logo on your business card can be really crucial in helping the investor remember who you are and what you do. And this is also why we recommend having a really clear tagline, is because that can spark that recall with the investors. Now, this is going to lead us into discussing the tagline, which a lot of people love using slogans. And you can see here, we have some example of those, like creating the future of oncology or innovate, design, and optimized. Like, those are great slogans, but unless the investor is already familiar with your company, they're not going to have any idea of what it is you actually do. And so your tagline is a really good way to ensure that you are making it easy for an investor to know who you are. And so you want it to be clear. So you don't want, like, we have more generalized impressions here, which are a little bit better, but can be slightly misleading, like taking the pain out of bladder cancer was a diagnostics company. But what we recommend is going for something where what we consider the compelling taglines, where scaling production of microbial medicines with synthetic biology. That is a much clearer tagline that really tells an investor what you're doing. And so, as we mentioned, you want these to be 6 to 8 words, just a sentence that highlights the key points of your company in language that anyone can understand. And once we're done really talking about the branding and messaging, that's where we'll open it up to work with some of you to really see if we can help you develop a more compelling tagline, like autonomous, flexible, robotic platform for cancer intervention. Again, it's not a lot of words, but already gives you a lot of information about what the company does. Now, once you've developed the tagline, you want to move on to the elevator pitch. The elevator pitch should be about 5 to 7 sentences, and it should give investors a good idea of what your company does, so what the technology is, what stage of development you're at, what makes the technology unique, what you're raising, and what milestones you'll hit with that raise. And this is a really great introduction. We've had companies use it in multiple different ways. It's great as the first part of your executive summary, your one pager, and your pitch deck. It serves as a great intro email paragraph when you're doing your first message of your outreach, either a cold email or in a partnering conference also. So the elevator pitch really has a lot of uses that is really good to kind of get that as a beginning stage for a company.
And so the one thing I'm going to tie this back specifically to partnering events, because at Resi we see thousands, if not tens of thousands of messages between entrepreneur to investor, and we know what works and what doesn't work. What doesn't work is saying, "Hi, you're going to be at Resi. I will also be at Resi. Let's meet." Because investors will see that. They will have no idea what your company does. They will have no idea if you're in scope. And then they'll look at the 250 other entrepreneur messages that they have, and they'll go through those. But what does work is, again, within 5 to 7 sentences, effectively being able to describe not just what your technology is, but some of the other compelling reasons why you should meet, and fitting all of that into this elevator pitch. That has a big impact on not just getting a meeting, but not just getting a response rate, but getting a meeting.
Yeah. As we said, make it as easy as possible for the investor to say yes.
Yep.
So as we mentioned, in terms of your marketing collateral, you're going to have your executive summary. So this should be 2 pages, 1 to 2 pages, and this should be written in prose. And this is a great way to tell your story. And so one thing that we like to emphasize is investors invest in a team as much as they invest in a technology. I was actually listening to recordings of some of our uh, uh, panels at our last conference over the last couple days, and there were so many investors that emphasized the importance of the team, and especially, with early stage companies, with the knowledge that most companies have to pivot at some point, and having a team that is capable of achieving that they've surrounded themselves by the right people, is something investors look for. So this is where you want to highlight who you are, why you of all people are the one who should be doing this project, why your team is uniquely qualified to move this forward. So that's kind of, you want to give them, of course, the information on your technology, what milestones you've hit, but you definitely want to use this to show them who you are.
Yeah. And so at Resi, we also do a pitch challenge, and it's called the Innovators Pitch Challenge. And we will put together typically a panel of between 4 to 6 expert sector specific investor judges to sit there and watch the company's pitch. And as part of that, we put a big emphasis and focus on the Q&A portion. So there's a 6 minute pitch, there's 7 minutes of Q&A that follow, and almost every company that doesn't spend some quick part of their 6 minute pitch talking about their management team will be asked questions about their management team in that 7 minute Q&A. So we know it's important not just because we see a lot of companies throwing that information on there, but most importantly, we see a lot of investors requesting it.
Yeah. So the one pager, and this is actually something that we have a template for, so you can reach out to us if you would like us to provide you with the template. We've developed this as a way to kind of very easily give all of the information. But this is essentially the executive summary, but in bullet point form. One other thing that this is great for, so our pitch companies have a table at our conference. And so this is a great thing to have as a printout. You want to make sure it has your contact information. And it's a great way to kind of have something that has all of the relevant information that would be found in your executive summary or your pitch deck, but in an easy to take document that someone can just scan through to see all of the salient information about the management team, the technology, the milestones you've hit, the funding to date, and what you're looking to raise, your IP. So this kind of covers everything in terms of what a company is trying to accomplish. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about the pitch deck in terms of your marketing collateral. So as we said, 10 to 12 slides. I cannot tell you how many times we've seen 60 slide decks, and an equal amount of time I've heard investors complaining about 60 slide decks. They're not going to look through all 60 slides. You don't need to give them all of your studies worth of data, because they're not going to look through that right off the bat. As we mentioned, this is all about getting that first meeting. Save the 60 slide deck for like the third or fourth meeting when they actually want to start looking at the data more in depth. This is just about getting your foot in the door. And so
You
this
know,
is,
another common thing that we see, Karen, is companies that try to cram 60 slides of information onto 10 slides.
yeah,
And just, and that is even worse than having 60 slides.
yeah,
So there's a real art to it, and it has to be easy to read. It has to highlight the most important information that's going to catch the investor's attention. But it's not a matter of cramming in every single detail you want to share. You just want to get that first meeting. You'll
yeah.
have plenty of time to elaborate.
Yeah, and it needs to be standalone as well. Because you'll be sending this deck out. Don't make it so that they can't be understood unless someone is there speaking to the slides. So this is by no means like an absolute, you have to follow this formula, and because each slide deck needs to tell a story and it needs to be cohesive. But this is the type of information that we recommend you include. So, having your cover with the logo, your tagline, and your contact info, and definitely make sure that your contact info is on there to make it easy for the investor to reach out to you again. Start off with your elevator pitch. Talk about the unmet medical need. Talk about the technology, especially what makes it unique. That is absolutely critical. Make sure to highlight what differentiates you from competitors, either what's currently on the market or what is being developed in parallel. Do a little, sort of give an overview of the validation and data that you have. Anything else that you think might be relevant, like partnerships that you may have, on upcoming trials that you may have scheduled, or or anything like that. Definitely talk about the management team and any key members of your scientific advisory board that are important. And you can have some supplementary data, but really make sure to have it at 10 to 12 slides. And a lot of times you end up having to pick and choose what you want to highlight. Um, but as Max mentioned, one of the key components that we recommend is a Gantt chart, because one thing you're definitely going to need to put into your materials is how much you're raising and what you're going to do with that money. And so having a Gantt chart is a really great way to give a lot of information in a visual manner to an investor. And this is one example that we've used. So this was a diagnostics company, and this was at the end of 2018. So this is quite an old Gantt chart, but I want you to understand that, that when they produced this Gantt chart, this was the current time. And the reason that this is so good is because it gives in one image, it gives the investor information of how much they've already raised in both equity and grant, what they've accomplished in the different key areas of their company. So in this case, the research that they've done, the IP, and the development of the diagnostic kit. And giving the timeline with which they've developed these things. And then they're talking about their fundraise, how long it's going to last, and what milestones they'll hit within that time frame. And so it gives a really large amount of information about what they've accomplished, what they're going to accomplish, and what inflection points they're going to hit with the current fundraise. And we always recommend fundraising for 2 to 3 years, because you don't want to go straight from one fundraise into the next. You want to have a very realistic timeline. And remember, like, as you're getting into due diligence, these people are familiar with the industry, so you don't want to overestimate how fast you'll be able to hit the milestones. You don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. And you want to be transparent and reasonable about your financial needs. But that being said, you also want to make sure that you are getting what you need. Like, don't cut yourself short and cut corners in terms of the amount that you're asking in your fundraise, just because you want to try asking for less money. Ask for what you need. If you're looking to hire a CRO and you've gotten 2 quotes, go with the higher one, because you're going to be giving away 20 to 30% of your equity at any given fundraise. So you want to make sure that you are getting everything that you will need to hit those milestones that you want to achieve. Greg or Max, do you have anything you want to add in terms
I
of
would say I would just add that most companies, I would say most early stage companies that are fundraising for the first time, they talk about raising too little to get them far enough. So, definitely think about what you're going to need over the next 2 to 3 years and talk about that amount. And you won't need it all at once, and investors understand that. They're not going to give it to you upfront anyway. It's a process, but don't sell yourself short, and don't have too short of a time frame in mind. I've heard many times someone say, "Yeah, I'm raising 150,000 that's going to get me over the next 6 months. Because then, as soon as even if you did raise that money, you're already in a bind because you won't have a plan for getting, the next 6 months or a year after that. So yeah, think about a decently long time frame that you're raising money for.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Greg. We say 2 to 3 years. The one thing you don't want to do is raise money and then take a day off and then turn around and start raising money again. You don't forget that you have a company to run. And so yes, fundraising is constant and it's hard work and it takes a lot of time. Do whatever you can to minimize the time between full-time fundraising. So give yourself a runway.
Yeah, and with that, before we move on into discussing how to find your target investors once you have your branding and messaging straight, is anyone wanting to be the first person to step up and start give us what your current tagline is, and we'll work with you a little bit and see if we can help you with that?
Well, while we give some of the people some time to be brave, we did get a question. So, Karen or Greg, I'm let one of you guys answer this, but the question asks, how do we account for equity to staff who are taking reduced salaries?
I think that depends on the company and the agreements that they make. And I think that that will also a lot of times be taken into account with term sheets. I mean, that's something that a lawyer would generally be figuring out as opposed to, anyone else. I think they're the ones that can answer that question better.
And not only reduce salaries, how about no salary? Because that's also very common,
Yeah.
to not take a salary at all for until money has been raised. So
Yeah, but generally in the term sheets, as you're going from one round to the next, there will be information in there about dilution of existing shares and what that means going forward. So that will all be part of the negotiations from one round to the next.
Travis, he typed his tagline. Um, it may be easiest to just let Travis kind of join us and come speak, but his tagline says STX-101, a first-in-class 5-HT3R partial agonist for severe refractory IBS-D. Not sure
Okay.
if you guys can see that typed out in the chat or not. Let's see
Um,
if we can give Travis the ability to speak. Because one of the things that we've always found is when you're generating a tagline, it takes a lot of reiterations. I mean, you might have
yeah.
to sit there and work through it, jot down a few. Um, because when you only get 5 to 7 words, the words matter. So it is just a matter of coming up with a good combination of how to effectively communicate the point.
Yeah. So I would say that this has probably a little too much information. I don't think you have to mention that it's a 5-HT3R partial agonist. Um, so I would even just mention that I'm assuming it's a small molecule. I would do that maybe. Just talk about a first in class small molecule for severe refractory IBS-D. Greg, I don't know what you think.
I don't think you need to name the asset. That's too much information for your tagline.
Yeah.
So I agree. I agree with Karen. I think you're making too much of an assumption that the person who's reading this will know what a 5-HT3R partial agonist is. Um, I don't know what it is, and I would have no idea what that is, but I do understand the indication that you're aiming for. So I think it would be sufficient, like Karen said, to say it's a small molecule to treat that particular disease.
Yeah, I was gonna completely agree with that, Greg. I have no idea what a 5-HT3R is, and the reason we said it is because it's probably likely that neither will the gatekeeper, which is what we referred to earlier. So if there's an investment firm, either let's say there's an investment associate who is sourcing and doing a lot of the partnering activity for their managing partner or someone in a partnering platform, if they don't know what a 5-HT3R is, and there's a high likelihood that they might not, they'll know what a small molecule is, and that will help them identify if you're in scope or not.
Yeah. Laura, I know that you raised your hand, so why don't we give you the mic? I saw that you also shared your tagline, but if you are available to chat, I think that will be very helpful.
And we're actually getting a lot of good feedback. And the one thing I will say, if we don't have time to get around to the tagline today, please, please, please reach out to either me, Greg, or Karen, and we would be more than happy to set up a call and go through your tagline, go through what you guys are doing, how we can help with your fundraising, and all of that.
And I do also want to mention that, Max, if you wouldn't mind sharing the link to our Jot form. So what we have also, we have an AI agent that we've developed to help you consolidate some of your marketing collateral as kind of a first step. So give us your information. Like put in your, like it has a way for you to attach your existing executive summary and pitch deck. And if you fill out that questionnaire, we'll get back to you with an assessment document that will also contain a first pass at a tagline and an elevator pitch. We've actually had investors who gave us feedback saying that the information in the assessment form is a better summary of a company's what they're doing than the materials that the company themselves produces. And they find it to be very useful. And so that's also a tool to help you get on track with how to express your technology. So if we don't get around to chatting with you today, you can also reach out to us for that form, and we can get back to you with that. But is Laura going to be able to join us?
Laura McIntosh, would you like to read your tagline?
Hmm.
Well, we can read it. So
Yep.
in-home behavioral analytics are the new medical device.
So I would say that I would want this to be a little bit more specific. I don't know what exactly and what analytics you're measuring, how you're measuring them, how they're going to be used as a medical device. I think okay, we can give you access so that you can turn on your mic. Here we go. You should be allowed to speak now.
Yes, thank you very much. I was desperately searching for the mic.
We can hear you now.
Excellent.
Thank you. So my company is a remote monitoring company for non-technological older adults so that they have access to healthcare providers from their home, similar to a medical device, but in this case for people who don't use technology effectively. And so what we're trying to do is track their behavioral patterns in the home in order to be able to say whether they're on their normal patterns. Are they eating as normal? Are they getting up as normal? Are they active as normal, etc., so that anomalies can be detected and we can get attention to that person when there appears to be a problem. So the point of our tagline would be to say that those in-home behavioral analytics are then substituting as a medical device for that person to be able to get healthcare access.
I would even just go along the lines of talking about remote at-home monitoring, analyzing abnormal behavior for early intervention. Something along those lines, because I think that's the point of what you're trying to accomplish. You're telling them that it's remote monitoring, it's at home, it's detecting abnormal behavior, and then it allows early intervention to, pinpoint what the problem is for someone who, might not necessarily be seeking medical help otherwise. And so Again, this is probably something that we'd want to workshop and go back and forth a little bit on, but I think something like that gives more information about what it is you're actually accomplishing, and gives the investor or whoever you're speaking to a lot more context about what it is your technology accomplishes.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Karen. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, if you don't include it in your tagline, in your elevator pitch, definitely include the terms aging or elderly, because it's a really hot area. And I think it's clear from, being a home-based monitoring system, most people will probably deduct that it's for the elderly or for the aging population. But that's great. It sounds like fantastic technology.
Thank you. I will follow up.
Yep.
Awesome. So now we have my friend Laure from France. Hi, Laure. Um, so your tagline, you're welcome to speak if Karen, can you
Yep.
undo it? But
Hi.
oral small molecules to block and reverse the progression of genetic neurodegenerative diseases. Um, I I think it's very complete. Maybe a bit long. I don't know. What do you think, Karen? Could it be shortened? But I think it's important that it's an oral administered small
Yeah.
molecule. That's really important.
So I think that, I think so. Is there one specific indication that you're starting with? Because I think that genetic neurodegenerative diseases is a bit broad.
Yeah, it's we start with Huntington's disease. So I guess I could mention it, but really we have a focus on a group of pathology that are all related to axonal transport defect, which is a defect in brain communication. And we have a technology that applies to some 50 pathology. The first one is Huntington disease. The second one is Rett syndrome. And we also have some results in a genetic form of Parkinson disease.
Yeah, so maybe then the best way to do it is to say oral small molecules to prevent neurodegeneration caused by axonal transport. What did you say? Defects, axonal transport defects.
Okay, but then not a lot of people know about axonal transport. So
Yeah, so but that's why I specified neurodegeneration so that they know it's CNS.
okay.
And then it gives them the class of diseases, and even though it doesn't mention one specifically, that might be enough to kind of like, so it might be better off to just say Huntington's disease, because that's something that most people are familiar with. But because you're talking about a broader class of diseases that all share the same underlying issue, that's kind of why I mentioned axonal transport defects.
Okay.
Because even though people might not be familiar with axonal transport defects, I think that if mentioning neurodegeneration, and I think most people, even if they're not super familiar, are, at least somewhat familiar that, neurons have axons. I think that's something that most people are at least, okay, that makes sense. And then by saying axonal transport, they might not know specifically what that class of diseases is, but I think that's enough to give them the gist of what's going on. Greg, I don't know if you have a different opinion.
I'm afraid I have to disagree with you, Karen. I think it's a little too technical. I wouldn't understand that concept, and but I would understand that it blocks and reverses the progression of neurodegenerative diseases. I think that's probably enough for a tagline to give a context of what the company does, and maybe a
Yeah.
little bit less technical.
The reason that I'm kind of hesitant is because I feel that's a little broad. Because genetic neurodegenerative diseases is a broad category and they don't all function in the same way, which is why I was wondering if maybe going by that specific class. But maybe then then maybe it might be better to specify Huntington's disease if that's your lead indication.
Okay.
Hey, that's great, Laura. Good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah. We have one more, and we're running out. We're not running out of time, but let's look at George's
Okay, let me,
about glucose monitoring.
okay, hold on. Let me just, George, I will. There we go. George, if you would like to join us, you should now have ability to speak with us as well.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you. So, hello team. Thank you again for this opportunity. I think this is a session that we'll definitely be needing on specifically with working on our messaging. Quickly, we are CGM developer. We're based out of Nairobi, Kenya, so we're in Africa. I think would be classified as being based in the middle of nowhere, as mentioned in the beginning of the pitch. But quickly, as our tagline would be scaling continuous glucose monitoring as the gold standard for diabetes management. So I think we were trying to communicate that we would like to replace the traditional handheld glucometer that is still used by 90 to 95% of diabetics around the world who are yet to encounter a CGM. Thank
Okay,
you.
so what makes your CGM different from the ones that are already on the market?
So one innovation that we're using is instead of using a single filament electrode that is very hard to fabricate and requires an applicator, we're using a microneedle array, which allows the CGM to sort of get rid of the applicator, but also it lowers our disposable bits or the disposable parts of the sensor because we are using a reusable electronic sensing module, and then the patch would be what is disposable. So that would be with the design focus of keeping the costs as low as possible for us to sort of get over that switching cost from those who haven't yet encountered the technology one or wouldn't be able to switch over just because of the costs of the current devices on the market.
Okay, so I would actually emphasize reducing the cost of CGMs through better manufacturing and less fewer disposable parts or something like that. I would really emphasize what it is that's different about your CGM. And if it's then also friendlier for, countries outside of the first world that don't have the necessary supply logistics chain or whatever it is, where CGM use is a lot less a lot is seen a lot less because I think that sometimes uh CGMs have permeated different markets at different rates. Then that's what you want to emphasize.
Okay.
What about something like
And
making
go.
CGM affordable in developing countries or something like that, or globally? Or
I think still,
I like that idea.
emphasizing that, cheaper manufacturing and fewer disposable parts, something like that's really concrete about what makes your specific CGM unique is something that you want to highlight in your tagline.
Okay, so that would really be capturing that unique value proposition instead of using a general term, which would be depending on how whoever was reading would maybe misinterpret that. So I think we haven't thought of capturing that value proposition, but I think that's something we can take into consideration.
Yeah, as one of our colleagues, our COO, Shagato, once said that, you don't want a tagline that's a slogan
Mhm.
unless you're someone like Apple or Google and everyone already knows exactly what it is you do. Otherwise, you
Okay.
want your tagline to be a lot more descriptive so that they know what it is you do.
Okay, sure. Thank you for that.
Absolutely. We only have, we're almost out of time, so I wanted to give Max an opportunity to talk a little bit about um, finding investor targets and the importance of, once you have your marketing collateral, making sure that you're reaching out to investors who are actually a fit for you.
Yeah,
We
I
will
know.
share these slides with you, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll share these slides and the video recording as well to everyone. And so I know we're kind of out of time, so I'll really quickly just kind of talk about this. But again, we were able to share a little bit about the importance of not just reaching out at partner events, but continuously reaching out um, throughout and between the events. We are a little bit biased, but of course we think that our investor database was built to be the best tool to do so. So if there's any companies out there that are looking at not just obviously fundraising, but if you're looking to connect with investors, we tell companies this all the time, but if you're raising typically between 0 to 15 million, the right investor that you need is probably going to be one that you've never heard of before. And the reason for that is because they have a lot of flexibility in their thesis. They can write checks in your range. And it's not a matter of connecting with 10 to 30 of them. It's a matter of connecting with 6 to 800 of them and at least being able to identify that many of them to then work from that list. So if there's any companies out there that want to kind of go through and sample the investor database with either myself, Karen, or Greg, we will circle back to maybe that first slide now, Karen, where you guys can see our email addresses. Please, please, please feel free to reach out. Shoot us an email. We are more than happy to jump on a call with you, help you with either your branding and messaging or trying to get a global target list of investors. The good thing about LSN is that we have seen hundreds, if not thousands, of companies succeed through our database and through the conference. And so we really know what we're talking about. We know what investors respond to well, and we're more than happy to help all the companies out there.
All right. And with that, I think we are out of time. But thank you, everyone. It was lovely to have a chance to chat with some of you. And again, feel free to reach out. And I'm sure you'll be hearing from us. So thank you all and have a lovely rest of your day.